Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am with Mike Dawson, the
Hi,
cartoonist of the fifth quarter. How are you?
good. I'm great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Tell me why you love comics.
Comics is just the way that I have. I don't know. I mean, I'm 45 years old. I've been making comics now for 25, 30 years. I just don't know any other way that, like, I feel like as a cartoonist, I can express myself, put myself out into the world, except through comics. I mean, I love to write and I love to draw, and with comics, I get to do both. So that's always, the initial exciting thing about them. But I find it's a language that it's very easy to communicate ideas through. So I love to read comics. I love to write comics. So yeah.
Tell me the spark. Like, was there a specific person, a specific cartoonist, a specific strip that did it for you?
So I grew up in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and there was a weekly comic called the Beano that used to come out that had strips. So it was weekly gag strips. Are you familiar with it at all? Have you ever heard of
Yeah,
it? Yeah. So Dennis the Menace, but the English version.
the real
Uh,
menace, the real
the real
menacing
Menace.
Dennis.
um,
American
I
Dennis the Menace doesn't compare.
he's not quite as as vicious as English Dennis the Menace. Those comics, they're just short gag strips. They come out weekly. It's like an anthology. A bunch of British cartoonists would write these so there's a number of characters: Dennis the Menace, the Bash Street Kids, was it a Minnie the Minx? One page comics, funny, like a dark, like it's sort of like sort of edgy kind of, especially for me as like a little kid, seemed
Yeah.
sort of edgy. It. I don't know. I just it was very funny to me. I love those kind of comics. There was also another comic called Oink, um, with an exclamation point. There was a short-lived English weekly comic. That might have been monthly, but that was actually even more sort of I guess dark and like kind of like but like funny, like for kids, but like kind of like like sort of a sensibility like Garbage Pail Kids.
Yeah.
Um, where it's sort of like a little bit kind of grim, not like not for nice kids kind of thing. Those are my initial sort of early comic stuff. And then I
And
got into Marvel comics as a teenager.
any
With
particular Marvel comics?
Yeah, I started off with Marvel Comics Presents.
Oh, a
It was
variety of things.
Yeah, that's sort of like, well, it's kind of funny because as I mentioned, I used to read British comics. In British comics, um, I was reading also the British version of the Transformers comic. So
Hmm.
Marvel published two Transformers comics in the 1980s. There's the US one, but there was actually a English Transformers comic, which was a lot of the time actually completely different than what was happening in American comics. Like separate comics were being made. But in the back of every issue of Transformers, they would publish some American comics, uh, like that were imported. So it was a weekly strip, so they'd break up like an American story and put it in the back of this English Transformers. And the two comics that I first got me exposed to Marvel comics, but I think had a lot to do with my interest in sort of like a little bit sort of outside the box type artists, was Rocket Raccoon by Mike Mignola. So like this was like very early Mike Mignola work. Rocket Raccoon was it was a very sort of zany, strange comic, very much outside of like Marvel continuity. I mean,
Yeah.
now Rocket Raccoon is clearly inside Marvel continuity, but in those early like weird comics, like where he was all fighting like murder clowns and like he lived in this bizarre world of like animal robots.
Now he's one
So
of the
Rocket
most
Raccoon,
famous characters in the world.
yes, it's
Isn't
so
that
bizarre to me.
insane?
And then the other one, who is yet to become one of the most famous characters in the world, was Barry Windsor Smith's Machine Man limited series. So again, sort of outside of regular Marvel continuity, this very like strong voice of like a writer artist. I don't think he wrote it, but he's a very like Barry Windsor Smith, like a very sort of like had a very recognizable, distinct style. And that
Yes,
was
so
that
good.
limited series where it was like set in the future. I think it was set in 2020, which I can't believe we're here now. So that was a lot of my early stuff. So I think that's why like I got into Marvel stuff, but sort of from a strange angle. You
You
know.
ever see that that Alan Moore story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is set in the far future of 1997.
Okay. Was it
Yeah.
written before then, or
It was written in 1985.
okay? Yeah,
I'm
I know the one. I know of it. Yeah,
yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah,
the distant
1997.
past now.
Sure.
25 years ago. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So would you say that those two are the biggest influences on your work? Like, or are there others?
When I, as a teenager, I became like so I sort of got into Marvel comics, sort of like from sort of a strange angle. I moved to the United States and I became like a straight up like Marvel kid. So like a lot of my favorite creators was like John Byrne, um, Chris Claremont stuff. And it wasn't until I got to college that I discovered sort of alternative comics, and smaller publishers like Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly. And for a long time, I was very interested in sort of like, small press alternative comics, which I think sort of became graphic novels eventually, like into the early aughts, like uh, Jimmy Corrigan, Chris Ware, but then like Dan Clowes' work became sort of like mainstream graphic novels. What was sort of once sort of alternative comics sort of became like bookstore literary comics.
Yeah.
Um, so that stuff, I love all that stuff, and I read. That's what a lot of what I read or did read. These days, I've been reading a lot of middle grade and YA books, just
Yeah.
because I like to sort of see how they work, and I'm interested in middle grade books that don't like sort of like dumb things down for their readership, that are still like complex, well written stories. I'm actually very interested in reading that stuff these
Like Raina
days.
Telgemeier.
Rain is wonderful. And there was a book I read very recently called Shark Summer by Ira Marks. It is a middle grade graphic novel. It's set in the town in, I guess, Cape Cod area where they're filming Jaws. So it's like Jaws is being filmed like while
Yeah.
the story's going on, but there's a whole like mystery. It's a complex book. It's like it's for middle grade audiences, but it's just as well written and like thoughtfully put together as any book. And I'm interested in that now because that's what I'm writing right now.
Yeah, the whole mainstream indie label is so misleading because like Mouse is classified as an indie book.
Is it?
Like more people have read Mouse
Yeah, I think
than
so.
most
Right then.
mainstream comics.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I mean, Mouse. It's weird. Yeah, that's not a alternative comic. So those labels don't really make so much sense. I mean, yeah, like Raina, as you said before, Raina Telgemeier is more well read than I'm sure like any like Batman book these days.
Then everything except Dogman.
Dogman's probably giving her a run for her money. My
Yeah,
son reads those Dogman books. He can't get enough of them.
I've heard they're really popular. Like,
Yeah, and Dave Pilkey seems to put out 2 a year.
yeah.
It's like printing money. These kids can't get enough of it. Like yeah, my son like just loves it. He's 9.
What would you say you take from those specific cartoonists? Like, for example, like what would you take? Do you think that there's something from Chris Ware that you're aware of that you're taking, or from Dan Clowes, or
I mean, I guess I'm not sure. I mean, I had read comics. Like I'm 46 now. I've read comics my whole life. It's all sort of like embedded into what I'm making as a creator now. It's hard for me to sort of pinpoint like who I'm like writing like. I hope I'm sort of being myself. But like I do enjoy a comic. Like I like a comic that's got well developed characters, like distinct characters. I like when like when I'm reading like slice of life but middle grade books. I like when the dialogue is realistic. I like a good kind of I like comics that are like writer focused, but like with a very well crafted cartooning, like the cartooning doing the work of like telling you that story. I've never been able to appreciate, even though I love a lot of alternative comics. It's been harder for me to sort of appreciate comics that are not very narrative driven. For me, it's like a story always comes first. I just sort of see it as a storytelling, you know,
Okay.
thing.
Yeah.
Thing.
What's first, second like as a publisher?
I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, I have my first graphic novel for middle grade readers, which the poster back there, the fifth quarter, came out last May. I have the sequel, the fifth quarter Hard Court, is coming out in just a few months in July. You know,
Cool.
it's a very, I mean, obviously I love the work, what they've done with the production quality. I love how the books have come out. It's exciting for me. It's the first time in my life where my books are getting into libraries, everywhere. Schools are aware of them. I've been able to visit schools even during this pandemic. I've done a little bit of that, and I think it helps to be, a publisher that's so well established in this sort of area. Sort of has helped me in a great many ways. Even if they're not setting up the school visits, just everyone knows of them. Like they're well known. Teachers know who they are. Librarians know who they are. So that's fantastic. So it's been wonderful. I feel very lucky.
They also have the best logo of any publisher out there.
It's a good logo.
Yeah, a good logo. What drove you to create the fifth quarter? The reason I was drawn to this was because I just really love basketball.
Okay.
So I'm like,
Do you,
"Ooh, basketball book."
Do you like to play it or watch it?
No, I just like to watch it. I'm like, oh, a basketball book. Must see it.
Well, so I did not understand basketball very much as a kid or even as an adult. Up until like a few years ago, I wasn't able to watch basketball. But my older child, my daughter, started playing in fourth grade, sort of in our town travel league, and she took to it. She wasn't that great, but she sort of had some natural ability, and it was just so fun to watch her getting better. And it was also great to start to understand the appeal of watching a game of basketball. Like kid, like fourth, fifth grade, like it's just as competitive and intense sometimes as like any NBA game. Like not intense in a bad way, but like exciting.
Yeah.
Because it's still athletes trying their best and like trying to make something happen. And it's exciting to see it when it does, and then the agony of defeat as well.
Trying to win, yeah.
Yeah, to win. So I developed an appreciation that I didn't have from my own childhood of athletics as something that kind of helped build self-confidence, build sort of self-esteem, was what I was seeing in my child. And I wrote a short comic essay for Slate online, essentially talking about that dynamic. It's called My Daughter the Jock, and it's about how I grew up as a nerd. Specifically in that comic, I show myself reading Rocket Raccoon, and it's from the 80s. I hated sports. To me, the jocks were my enemy, and then like I see it's so different with my daughter, and sort of it's a little bit of a comic essay just about like that change. But from that was just this little spark of an idea that an editor and a book publisher pointed out to me that could be a story. The idea of like this kid who's not so good becoming better, and like sort of that being the drive that this kid has to go from just being. So the fifth quarter, the title means an extra period at the beginning of a game, especially in these small leagues, like small travel between leagues, where the kids who aren't as good, the developmental kids who are like still learning how to play the game, get to go in, but the points don't count. So it's an extra period at the beginning of the game for the not so good kids.
It's like an opening act.
Character, what's that?
It's like an opening act.
Yeah, it's like an opening act. They play a fifth quarter, and then the real game starts. We used to call it the real game. And so the story of the fifth quarter is a kid. Her name is Lori. She loves basketball. She does have some natural ability, but she just isn't really like there yet. And she only goes in during the fifth quarter, but she wants to get in that real game. She wants to score, a basket that counts. And a lot of the story is about her dealing with issues with her friends at school, But then a lot of contrast with stuff that's going on at home. Her mother's running for local political office. So mother has a goal as well. So both Lori and her mother have different goals. They're both driving towards, working hard towards. And the story in the first book is them sort of having to deal with success and failure. And failure is kind of a big part of it, that you have to learn to deal with losing just as much as you're hoping to win. So that's what that first one's about. The second one is it's a little different. It's a little I don't know if you have questions about it, or you want me to just go into talking about it a little bit.
Well, I was gonna say, I think there's a line in it that I think encapsulates the whole book, which is if you win the game, if you want to win, you can't be afraid to lose.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great, message to be sending to middle grade readers.
Okay.
Especially, and I guess I'm just gonna go here, especially to female middle grade readers. I feel like there's not, like these days with graphic novels, with middle grade graphic novels, I feel like a lot of them are aimed at girls.
I think so. I think
historically that has not been the case.
I think that's true. I think a lot of middle grade graphic novels, I don't think there's a lot of sports graphic novels aimed at a girl readership. But I don't think that, there are definitely some. There's definitely a lot of like books that are. But yeah, this was like there's a scene at the end of the fifth quarter where Lori and her mother are sort of dealing with a failure, and a lot of the dialogue comes from actually something that my wife had written to my daughter when my wife was dealing with a failure in her life. And that relationship between the mother and the daughter, in that scene where they're basically having to come to terms with failure, it really, to me, like that's what the book was about. And and a mother and a daughter being able to relate to each other and sort of understand each other a bit better through this sort of those events that had happened to them. And I don't want to spoil too much what the win or lose was about, but that's what that I think was driving that book. That's that scene that I knew it was going towards at the end.
Yeah, another thing for me that really stuck out in my mind was all of the character interactions in it. So you have Lori and her friends Elise and Sophia and Jordan, who's a fifth grader. We, growing up in school, girl politics and guy politics are completely different. How did you navigate this throughout the book?
So it's funny because my daughter now is an eighth grader, and she does ask me sometimes about like why boys act the way they do.
Because we're dumb.
Well, there's just a different way. There's a difference in sort of like what I perceive from my own growing up and what I'm seeing today. Like with the boys, they're just sort of like at each other. And I see it with my son, like, they like tear each other down. Like that's part of the dynamic that like my daughter's like, I don't understand why boys act this way. Tearing each other, you know what I'm talking about? Like, sort of ragging on each other all the time. Like, kind of like that's a lot of their dynamic. And it's not like what my daughter experienced, but she experienced different things, different, like a lot of misunderstanding, like fourth and fifth grade from what I could see. So I happen to live across the street from school.
Oh.
So I can actually see my child like at recess sometimes, like, and I actually could see like in fourth or fifth grade, like times when she was having a hard time or like not having anyone to like be with at recess. Like I had to move my office to the back of the house because before I was in a front room and I could see it, and it's something no parent should be seeing. I also used to run a Girl Scout troop that my daughter was in, so I would see a lot of the way the girls would interact with each other. But yeah, so I think a lot of what I've tried to do as a writer is just observational. I try to sort of see what's happening in my life around me and sort of bring that into my stories, because I really do like try to go for like I guess a level of realism that I hope my readers are able to like connect with and relate to. And it's probably the most gratifying thing that's happened to me since the book was published has been some of the times when I've gone to do school visits. Um, I do like a whole presentation about comics and basketball. And I assumed that like fourth grade kids reading the book would love to talk about comics and basketball. And they do like to talk about comics. Some of them like to talk about sports. But many of the questions that I get asked from kids was about like the way these friends are acting to each other. They're like, why was like, Sophia, being that way to Lori, and like my friend does that to me. Like it's very much like they sort of relate to that part. Like that and it felt great to me because I'm not a fourth grade girl, so I felt wonderful that like that came off, as legitimate to some of these readers.
You got it. Yeah.
No, it was probably the best compliment I received was like some fourth graders asking me like, they're concerned about the friendship between Lori and her friends. I want to know why would they treat each other that way?
But that's how it works, right? I mean, when
Yeah,
you're
I mean
growing up, it's just friends. I mean, I guess not even.
as an adult, as a parent, I come to think of it as like, like kids are just learning just as much as what they learn in school. They're learning social stuff, and through those years, that fourth, fifth, sixth grade, learning how to be a friend. And I think a lot of what happens is just misunderstanding and miscommunication. Like, so you think someone's feeling a certain way about you or saying something that you take a certain way, and it's just like not quite understanding yet how people are. And I think that, that's what is happening to kids in that age. I think fourth grade is actually tough. Like I always assumed that middle school was going to be the hardest for my kids. Middle school for my older child, I don't think has been as bad. It's had all its own weird stuff going on with coronavirus and the pandemic and like not
Yeah.
being in school. But in terms of social stuff, it was actually a little tougher in some of those earlier years because of just sort of not always understanding each other. So I'm trying to like get at that a bit in the writing.
What's more important to you, or I guess what's more satisfying to you, when a reader understands the message that you're trying to send, in this case, the dynamics of winning and losing, or when you get a compliment like that, like, oh yeah, you really got this dynamic this between these two characters, or
Um, I I guess so with the sequel to the fifth quarter, I didn't sort of know it at the time because but I think it actually reflects a lot of the pandemic in it. Um, and what I mean by that is like a lot of the story is about like things happening in the world that you can't control, and like stuff going wrong in your life that, like, and the stress that comes along with it, that it feels out of your hands. And what I'm trying to do, and I didn't realize it as I was writing it, but I sort of realized after I finished it, I think I was trying to get at sports being a place where you can control to some degree what happens. Like it's a place in your life, like for Lori playing basketball, and simultaneously in the second story, we flash back to her mother's childhood as a soccer player, and her mother's going through her own hard times with like divorce and stuff like that in her family. Um, they both find in their sport a place where they have a little bit of like control over the world. And I didn't think about that like as I was writing it. I realized afterwards that I probably was like channeling a lot of like what was going on in the world around me while I was writing it. So I would love if a reader like felt some of that. But like it's not like I was trying to like make a message. Like as I'm writing, I'm not like saying like, well, I want my reader to like, say, recognize the lesson I'm trying to teach them. Like if I could have a reader reflect back to me like what they got from a story, that would be the best thing. Like if it meant something to them in some way. Like I said, like I didn't think that the friendship dynamics in book one would be the part that would click with the reader. The fact that it did is like the best thing for me. To sort of like kind of see where something I've written is like meant something to a reader. I think the best thing to experience.
is that how you feel about art, like something you can control?
Oh, I guess that's true. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, like a lot of like what I've been thinking about the last couple of years, in writing the fifth quarter and like just sort of like my craft in general is that, there are certain, yeah, you can find something in your life that you can put the work into to become in control of. Like that I've put so much work into cartooning that I actually feel, like I'm a competent and capable cartoonist. And I'm sort of, when I'm talking to schools, I'm talking to kids about like how they can also like, put effort into be what they want to be. There's a line in the fifth quarter one. It's called "Hard Court Beats Talent."
Yeah.
It's a line that I heard a coach say to a group of kids at like one like basketball camp that my daughter was involved in, and this idea that putting work into something is actually going to give you the ability to beat talent, like anyone who's like got some natural ability but isn't working as hard.
Yeah.
It's true in basketball, but it's true in all sorts of aspects of life.
It's the
That's something
tortoise
I
and the
never.
hare, right? It's a
What's
tortoise and
that?
the hare.
Yeah, I guess putting in that work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I like that phrase, "Hardcore beats talent." And yeah, I mean, I think about that now in terms of cartooning and just anything like that effort. I mean, like the fifth quarter ends up being a bit of a book that maybe has a little bit of like you because it's sports. Maybe hope that the readers would get some motivation from it because that's just the nature of sports. It's not like I've set out to become a motivational speaker, but
Well,
I
that's the
guess that's
interesting thing about sports fiction is that all sports fiction on some level or another is hopeful.
yeah.
Because the fact is sports in real life is random. You don't know who's
I mean,
gonna
that's the
win.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like it's not like a game of Monopoly where it is just luck.
Yes.
Like so sports, you can't control the outcome, but you can have a little bit of a say in it. And I
Absolutely.
think that is really like what we like in sports fiction is that someone who maybe doesn't feel like they have that say, they usually get a chance to sort of like make their mark or have that impact. And obviously in most sports fiction, they win. But I think that is what we like about it. That's what we like about sports in general that I couldn't appreciate when I was a kid, but I do now.
It's when you're following somebody who's developing and you know they have talent, they have potential, and then you see them get there. That's like the most satisfying thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, has your daughter read the book?
She's read it.
What do you think about it? Knowing
I think
full
she
well
liked
that
it.
the main character is based on her. So,
I mean, I would say that the experience I had in my family life was definitely the kickstart to the story, but I do feel that Lori and her parents and their whole life, it's sort of become their own thing. And I don't feel that my daughter feels like she's being like written about, that
okay.
like I'm like telling stories about her. The book one is dedicated to her because there is like that there'd be no book without her. But I don't get the impression she looks at it as like something like, oh, here's a book about me doing something.
Yeah.
Especially now as the sequel, like my daughter actually doesn't even play basketball anymore.
You're
like
proud of it, huh?
I mean, that's pandemic stuff. I mean, like
Yeah.
she was still pretty heavily into it. She was starting to cool off on it a bit. Like, and it was a sixth grade when the lockdown first happened, but she'd been doing it from fourth through sixth grade. She was starting to like be a little less intense, but it essentially killed it for her. Like but she's actually discovered other things.
Cool.
And that's fine by me. Like whatever makes her happy.
When we started this interview, you talked about how you talked about comics as a language, and I did notice that in the way that in your cartooning style, you have a very expressive, not realistic, um, cartooning style where every gesture says exactly what it's supposed to convey. Uh,
I
what's
think
the
that
yeah,
I think that as a cartoonist, um, that's something I liked about like so again, this being a sports book, uh if any of your readers if you get to check it out, you will see like the characters are very rubbery. There's a lot of like it's very like clean line, it's a lot of movement, and yeah, like a lot of times there's only the amount of information you need. Like there's no noses at the time. Like it's supposed to be like speed, and it's like sort of it's supposed to reflect like a game in that way, like this the speed of a sports event. I if I could do it over again, I might put a couple of more noses back in. I think I was like really like, I was really leaning into that. Like I think in the sequel, I've eased up on that a tiny bit. But yeah, like that's again, it's not something I thought about like as I sat down, like, okay, let's think about like doing the least amount of like only what's necessary in each panel to sort of move the story along. I think that's just sort of where my natural instincts sort of took me. But I think there's a reason. Yeah, the comics work well with the sports angle again.
How many books will the fifth quarter be?
Well, right now it's 2. I would love there to be a third one. At the moment, that's not like decided upon. But I could see a third one absolutely happening. I have the story. I know exactly what it would be, and it would sort of bring, I think, that story to a good close because in the fifth quarter hard court, it's 2 years later, and Laurie's now in 6th grade. And then I would like to take her to 8th grade, and I think that would tell that story, like the full thing. But the second one does actually resolve things quite well as well. Like I don't want to spoil too much, but I thought of the fifth quarter book 1 in terms of like the actual success in the sports. I thought of it in terms of Rocky, and then the sequel I sort of think of as Rocky 2. If your listeners are familiar with that, in Rocky 1, Rocky only goes the distance. It's not about like winning like the whole game, but maybe better things happen for Laurie in book 2, like further success that she didn't know she could get to at the beginning of the story. So that basically gave it away. But
Okay. That's how sports things go anyway.
Yes, that is true.
All right. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Before we end this interview. It has nothing to do with this book. What is the best Queen song?
I think I would go.
You know why I'm asking. So
yes, I have for your listeners. One of my other books is called Freddie and Me, and it is a memoir that I wrote. It's published in 2008, and it tells the story of my life. Actually, the story of my family coming to America, but it's all reflected through every memory of Queen that I was able to like put back together in my head. So I love Queen. For me, the best Queen album is A Day at the Races. And my favorite Queen songs are either Tie Your Mother Down or Fat Bottom Girls. But it does vary because I just, I intense Queen fan. So there's really like not a lot of, I'll change what I love the most from, You like Queen yourself?
I love Queen. Yeah.
What would you say was the best one? Just so I'm not the only one. What's your favorite?
Well, my go-to karaoke song is Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay, yeah.
Because everybody, gets everybody a chance to join in.
That would, yeah, everyone would join in.
But I mean, it's just really hard to beat Under Pressure.
Oh, it's excellent one too.
Yeah. The annoying thing is when people think, you start playing it and people think it's Ice Ice Baby.
Well, that was very annoying to me in 1993. Everyone loved Ice Ice Baby. Like, no,
it's not Ice Ice Baby. But yeah. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
I'll let you
having
know
me.
when this is up.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. It's good to talk to you. Nice to meet you.